This video will provide a simple overview of what the Acoustic Diversity Index, or the ADI, is. It shouldn't be considered comprehensive or authoritative in any way whatsoever. It's rather intended to be a simple overview, which might be a useful resource if you're interested in acoustic indices and want to apply them in practice within ecoacoustics or acoustic ecology. I'll also add that this video has an accompanying blog post on my data science and acoustic ecology blog, Wrangling In The Antipodes, .wordpress.com. So on this blog, you'll find a breakdown of my workflow as I've applied here, along with code excerpts for executing the Acoustic Diversity Index in R. And along with that, there's also adjacent links to the data repository containing some of these audio files and as well the code up on GitHub. So check that out if you're keen. So the ADI is a key metric used in ecoacoustic research to assess soundscapes. The development of this index is based on the observation that acoustic community diversity is the aggregation of all species that produce sounds at a particular location and time, and also that each community has a distinctive acoustic signature depending on species communication. Now, if you've watched my previous video on the Acoustic Complexity Index, or you're familiar with that index, you might be wondering, this sounds kind of similar to the Acoustic Complexity Index. And in a lot of ways, it kind of is similar, but I'm going to provide a couple of helpful distinctions which set them apart. High Acoustic Complexity Index values indicate intensity modulations, often associated with transient acoustic events, such as bird vocalizations, while low acoustic complexity index values suggest constant intensities, such as continuous insect buzz or continuous human-generated sounds like the drone of machinery or vehicles. Now, in the case of acoustic diversity, high acoustic diversity index values reflect a high diversity of signals in different frequency bins or subsets of the frequency range above a certain intensity threshold. So whereas the Acoustic Complexity Index is largely concerned with a distinction between the intensity of transient and constant acoustic events, the Acoustic Diversity Index is based upon a high diversity of sounds present across the entire frequency spectrum above a given intensity threshold. So if you have lots of different sounds occurring across the frequency spectrum, which are loud enough, this should produce a high acoustic diversity index value. So let's test this theory out with some examples. So I thought it might be useful to give you a couple of examples of how acoustic diversity is computed and returned as a single metric ranging between 0, representing very, very, very low acoustic diversity, to 5.0, representing very, very high acoustic diversity. So in this first example, I have a 1-minute recording of a dawn chorus, and looking at the spectrogram here, we can see that there's a fair amount of acoustic diversity happening across that frequency range at varying intensities. The audio file is read into the acoustic diversity algorithm. It's discretized into 10 frequency bins against time samples. A lot more happens after that as we compute the metric, and then eventually it's returned as an acoustic diversity index value of 3.67. So we can say with a fair amount of confidence that that's a high amount of acoustic diversity. By contrast, here's another 1-minute recording from a different location. This was made on the banks of the American River on Kangaroo Island in the mid-afternoon. And as we can see, looking at the spectrogram, there's very little acoustic diversity, let alone much acoustic activity at all occurring. We can see that there's a bit of intensity at the very low end of the spectrum there, and a couple of transients occurring later on in the recording. As it's brought into the acoustic diversity algorithm and discretized into its respective frequency bins, we can see as a relative amplitude representation, there's only really stuff happening there at the very low end of the spectrum. So therefore, once the metric is computed, it returns a very minimal ADI of 0.01. So with that information dump digested by you all and hopefully metabolized, let's move on to some other audio recordings, which I'm going to play back along with their spectrograms, and we'll see how the Acoustic Diversity Index pans out for each of these respectively.
Okay.